Norm Sikulski with Relentless Investigative. Hey Norm, how you doing?
Just fine. How are you, Tom?
Good, thanks. I'm really excited about this conversation. You and I had a chance to do an interview style session at one of my most recent meetups in the Bay Area. We call it the Bay Area Private Money for Real Estate Investors meetup group. And there was just a huge amount of response to that. So I thought it'd be a great opportunity to talk with you again, and love to have you share information about what you do. I know we got a lot of very interesting stories, we'll call it, of experiences that you've had. But I think for this particular episode, what I'd really be interested in exploring would be, as a real estate investor, whether it's somebody new starting up, somebody that's veteran in the business, been doing it for a long time, whether they're active with a lot of deals or more passive where they put money into deals next to active investors. Can you share maybe a little bit? We'll start with what is the reason that your services would be really valuable, and then we can kind of spin around and talk a little bit about your background and maybe go from there.
Absolutely. First of all, I'm sure that for a real estate investor, it would not be, let's say, intuitive to retain a private investigator, just kind of right out of the gate.
Yeah.
However, we feel, and we've had a number of clients who feel that it's a valuable thing to do. The basic premise is this: is what you don't know is what's most likely to hurt you.
Mm-hmm.
So as a real estate investor, what you're trying to do is you're trying to manage the unknown.
Exactly. That's great.
You're trying to manage the unknown. And we, in fact, our website breaks it down this way. We break the unknown down into sort of three sequences. Mm-hmm. Ideally, boy, we'd love to see everybody, before they make that real estate investment, whether they're experienced, whether they're not experienced, wherever they are in the continuum, we feel that if you come to us on that front end, that what we do is we vet that deal for you. Mm-hmm. Do it on a pretty deep level, which is to say this, that you as a real estate investor may have seen, okay, this deal pencils out and there's profit in this deal, all the basic mechanics of my real estate investment, this looks like a good one. What we do is we go out and we do a background investigation and an asset investigation. Mm-hmm. These two things are important because you're going to want to know, is this a person who has a pattern of litigation, so that if you end up, something kind of goes sideways in any way, shape, or form, they're going to reflexively litigate. The person may have made representations about what their asset position is. Mm-hmm. We're going to be able to validate that.
Yeah. I think that's so important. I know in some other episodes we've spoken a bit about how important it is to do proper due diligence on projects and on teams. And I would say again and again that my experience is that the team is probably, the numbers obviously have to work out, but the team that's going to complete the project, whether it's a renovation project, even if it's a rental project, if it's going to be multiple units, it really is important to see who the team is, see how they've performed in the past, and really get into it. But again, especially if it's any sort of renovation project or new construction project, the team is so critical. And so I certainly understand and see the value in what you're talking about, because that's how we identify the risks, is understanding the unknowns. And that's, from what I understand, you're saying, is you uncover a lot of potential issues.
The right people can make even the most challenging situation work often. Mm-hmm. However, the wrong people, as you're indicating, the wrong people can take something that you would have thought was impossible to mess up and mess it up.
Oh, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more.
And at a core level, and I'll often say this to clients on the front end, is that I line up with Warren Buffett, who's, he's made a few dollars.
Mm-hmm.
And he says the number one job of the investor is to protect principal,
Yeah.
So that's what you're doing on the front end. Now, sadly, in my business, we rarely see people prior to making the investment. It's I analogize that a lot of times to the medical profession, where you don't see people, in that preventative medicine arena very often.
Mm-hmm.
You see people when they're sick.
Right.
So typically we see people then in what we tend to think of as sort of the mid game. Maybe they've invested money in the deal. They've thought the deal was going along pretty well, and then suddenly things start not going so well.
Mm-hmm.
They do follow-up calls with that person. Huge flag very often then. The emails don't get returned. The phone calls. In essence, the person they've invested with goes, what we say, they go dark.
Right.
And when they do, naturally for the investor, speculation. You say, well, what is going on here?
Mm-hmm. And
if they're not communicating, very often something you don't want going on is in fact going on.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So I agree. And so you mentioned early on, there's really three steps or three stages.
That's right.
Maybe just before we get into those three stages, could you just share just a little bit of your background? I know you've been in the private investigation business for over 20 years, right?
Oh, well over 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So my background is I originally started out in banking and risk, in risk analysis. And so I moved up in that. And through the course of my work at the bank I was at the time, I ended up uncovering a large, actually, real estate fraud. It was real estate, mortgage banking. There was a whole bunch of stuff in play there. And that started moving me more into the investigative side. I liked that. I pursued it further. I ended up getting a law degree, and I ended up overseeing white-collar crime for that bank that I was with at the time. Subsequent to that,
maybe just on that one, I know that you and I have spoken to this before, just to get a little bit of perspective on who you were working with and kind of at what levels. Now, I don't know how much you can name specifically, but I'd be interested to.
I was a senior vice president for Bank of America. That was the company, and that was sort of, we'll call it my rank. Then subsequent to that, I ended up doing some consulting. I consulted to the Bank of Hong Kong, again, white-collar crime, fraud prevention, this whole arena. And then I was at a law firm in San Francisco involved with merger and acquisition, M&A, as they call it.
I see.
All these different arenas sort of have this analytic side to them, the ability to really sort of do deep backgrounds. My partner, Paul Moody, down in Southern California, worked for a major oil company doing merger and acquisition for them prior to starting his investigative career. And he did that both here in the States and internationally. So he's looked at tons of companies and tons of opportunities to sort of ferret out the wheat from the chaff.
Yeah.
So together what we do is, candidly, no report leaves our office unless both of us have looked at it.
Right.
Work very collaboratively, and that actually ends up being a pretty exciting process, because invariably it's just two guys who've been doing this for a long time who just see it, get a slightly different hit on it, and that allows us to really uncover a lot of stuff that it's the synergy of the thing that we see more as a group than we would individually.
I see.
That gives us a much, much higher quality service that we can bring to people that retain us. So does that kind of address the background piece? Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. That helps out a lot. And maybe not on this particular episode, but on a future episode, I'd love to be able to revisit some of those projects of the past or or lessons of the past. We've had some really fun conversations, both on public interviews.
We've had some wild ones. We've had
Yeah.
some.
Totally. So, yeah. So, but for right now, maybe let's go back to the 3 stages.
Absolutely.
And as it relates to either new investors or veteran investors,
Sure.
what do you, if you could break down the 3 areas a little bit more, and then give maybe some
Sure.
practical advice on what they may look for, what they should do, what your advice would be.
So in the, I sort of outlined that sort of first stage.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're into the second stage, which is, as I said, candidly where we see people.
So just to recap, the first stage is where you get in there, you review, you dig in, you find out as much about the team or whomever it is that you're looking at as much as possible, so that you can identify if there are any flags, red flags. If there are, and you've said this a number of times, you say it a lot more eloquently than I do, and that is that if we can identify the risks
Mm-hmm.
and then mitigate them, at least we know that risk is there, and and sometimes I would even say there are some risks that you calculate into it. But if you know what it is, you can do that. You can sort of go from that perspective.
That's what contracts are for.
Mm-hmm.
So that but a contract, again, when an attorney drafts a contract, they do it based on foreseeability.
Mm-hmm.
And the quality of their foreseeability is based on the information that they have.
Yeah.
And so what we do as it relates to that attorney creating that contract is we're giving them a telescope as opposed to just looking out the window.
Ah, right. That's great analogy.
And that's a big difference.
Mm-hmm. And that's what contracts are for. Like you said, the contracts are there. We add clauses, we add protection for both sides, for both whether it's a borrower-lender relationship or a joint venture relationship, whatever it is, it's those clauses are there to protect both sides. And by understanding what the entire team looks like, we're able to really kind of design that contract in a more accurate and useful way.
Yeah, and I think that what it does too is it reduces, because there's a certain amount of fear that we have to overcome when we invest.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a useful tool to help manage that fear. And so I think this is especially for that new investor.
Yeah.
Because the first investment is wrought with a lot of anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
This is a brand new experience.
Yeah. And
you want to be able to get all the rational controls that you can without over-intellectualizing the thing. So that sort of speaks to that first group, I think. The second group, as I say, where we see most people, is the situation is, somebody invests, typically it's like a pool of investors in the real estate world.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll get like maybe a half a dozen investors, maybe they're into it for $25,000, $5,000, not $5,000, usually about $25,000 to $100,000 a piece, sometimes more, sometimes considerably more.
Mm-hmm.
They pool these funds so that they can really do something. They get involved in projects. Ideally, what they want to do is they want to silo those projects, let's say in an LLC. Maybe they're involved in multiple projects. They get going. The project gets going for maybe a year. Maybe the project has a 3-year window. They're a year and a quarter into the thing, and suddenly they get an unexpected cash call from their contractor.
Mm-hmm.
And hey, what's that about? More and more the story develops, and you get situations where even though the project should have been siloed sometimes, and it's unfortunate, but sometimes, well, it's quite unfortunate actually, sometimes contractors will take money from a performing project and divert it to a non-performing project in order to bolster the performance of that project.
Right.
And their reasoning internally is that at some point down the road, all the projects, because they're optimistic in a funny kind of way, that they're thinking, well, somewhere down the road, what's going to happen is all the projects are going to be fine, and then it'll balance. All the silos will balance, and everything will be right with the world. It's our experience overwhelmingly that when this kind of thing starts happening, the issue isn't a short-term cash flow. The issue is systemic. Typically, there's something fundamentally wrong with the way in which that contractor is operating.
Yeah.
And then if you have a contractor that you can't particularly work well with and they don't communicate well, which is often the case, then they go dark on you. But then they go dark on you and they have your funds. And now you're wondering, what do I do? And this is a very typical real estate investor scenario. What do I do? What do I do? Do I sue? That's a reflex. Do I sue? And our first answer to that is always the same. Never sue anyone because you're angry at them. No matter how angry, no matter how righteous your anger is, you have to treat it like a sub-investment.
Yeah.
So,
great advice.
So the answer is you need to know absolutely positively what the asset position of that, in this example, would be a contractor. What are the assets here? What can I hope to recoup? Because the state of California, where I am, the fast track for civil litigation is 5 years.
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
And your cost for business litigation is maybe $150,000, maybe more, $150,000 to $200,000. It's kind of shifting here.
Yeah.
And then you need to bring in expert witnesses, typically like forensic accountants, that kind of thing. That's another $50,000 or $60,000. And so you got a 5-year horizon, and which is longer than a 3-year project. So your litigation horizon is longer than the project was, and your dollars are significant. So unless you know what the asset position is of that person, you don't even want to seriously consider litigation. Just doesn't make sense. And so that's what we do.
Yeah, and if I understand you correctly, you're saying do whatever it takes to keep emotion out of that decision-making process.
Absolutely critical.
Yep.
And that, again, is another way in which companies like Relentless Investigative can be of use to a person, because we'll look at the data. They're not our contractor. And so we're looking at it with comparatively neutral eyes. We understand your source of anger. It's not that we lack empathy.
Yeah.
But we're looking at it from an outcome point of view. And we're doing the analytics for you, because it's very, very challenging for a person when you're in the middle of a situation to remain detached. It's very challenging. I would say this is nigh on impossible.
Yeah.
And so having somebody who can review all the analytics, provide really good, solid data points for you to make a quality decision, and work together with your attorney and help you to really get a nice, clear picture of what the right action steps are.
Yeah, so you being able to act as a liaison along with all the other services you provide, it keeps it more of a neutral basis, which helps take the emotion out of it, which helps for a more
better chance at it.
Yeah.
The challenge is with investor groups, because very often they've invested different dollar levels. So they're often sort of maybe you have like two people that are saying, geez, I don't know, let me hold off a little bit longer, let me hold off a little bit longer. And there's a tendency I've observed to sort of, for want of another expression, I would say sort of ostrich the situation.
Yeah.
Put my head in that hole and just wait. Maybe the thing will sort itself out over time.
Yeah, I've seen that so many times. Yeah.
It doesn't. It virtually never sorts itself out. I don't mean that cynically. I just mean that sort of from a reality base. It never sorts itself out pretty much. So you need to take some action, some affirmative action, and you need to get some data points to make quality decisions.
Yeah. Okay. So then if we go on to the third phase.
Well, the third phase is we see people, that's less often, but often enough, where they've gone through the whole litigation process. They now have a civil judgment. They've spent the money, they've gone through the heartache, the depositions, everything that goes along with it.
Yeah.
And now their challenge is to turn that judgment into cash. That's the challenge. So they may go to their attorney, and the attorney may say, let's bring them in for what's called an order of examination. Now, an order of examination, you bring them in, and under oath, you ask them where their assets are. Well, on a practical basis, this person's been under oath many, many times through the course of 5 years while you were litigating, and they've been reluctant to share the assets, where the location of their assets are.
Yeah.
Now, and I don't think it's particularly realistic to think that now that you actually have a lawful judgment, and that it'd be reasonable to think that if you told them where the assets were, you're going to go take them, that they're going to be forthcoming. So they're not going to tell you.
Yeah.
More often than not. Now, typically what we do with a client is if they have a judgment, what we do is we'll say, look, if we can, what would you be willing to take to make an end to this thing? Well, first thing, actually, I'm sorry, I got a little ahead of myself. First thing we want to do is we want to see if the person can get out of this judgment. Is it possible for them to just BK and file for bankruptcy, that is, and get out of the judgment entirely, or to get out of it for pennies on the dollar?
And that's part of your assessment process.
We have a bankruptcy attorney who's going to review the scenario for us, and then we're going to come back and we're going to basically tell you whether you have what's called in the business a paper judgment or not. If there's no assets there, or the person can get through the slip knot of bankruptcy, unfortunately, you may have just a paper judgment. It may be that way. And as hard as it is, we will give a person the bad news. We'll do the review and we'll get back and say, no, as near as we can make out, it's not looking good. And we'll explain exactly why. So it's not just a blanket statement. We'll give you the details on exactly why.
And just if we just recap and roll back just a little bit.
Yes.
This is a case where had someone hired a service like yours on even stage 2,
that's right,
one would have been able to tell, is it worth all the effort of getting a judgment if there's nothing there, if there's not enough there?
That's exactly right. And that goes full circle back to the idea of don't sue people who don't have any assets. Because there's no matter how angry you are, there's no upside here.
Yeah.
You just take a bad situation and make it worse.
Yeah. So to do it just to prove a point or to feel better for a few minutes, doesn't make sense. So
never.
Right.
It's tempting, but never. The other one too. The other one too, that is, I want this person to go to jail.
Yeah.
I hear that often. I want them to go to jail. And I'll typically say, well, perhaps after they've paid you, you might want to turn it over to a DA or something and see where that goes.
Yeah.
But what happens and I've seen this, unfortunately, I've seen this happen a number of times, is that the DA then goes ahead, let's say, and indicts this person. Well, whatever's left of your investment capital goes into their criminal defense. You just hired their lawyer.
Yeah, right.
And if they go to jail, the prevailing wage in in jail is none too good.
Right. So, yeah, so the whole idea, well, I was just going to point out too, you shared how on the second phase, you're able to be sort of the liaison.
Absolutely.
You really are pretty much the same thing in the third phase too, because as you said, you go there from more of a neutral perspective, and you just let them know what the facts are and what their options are.
Yeah. Now, if that judgment is something that we think is collectible, we'll tell you it's collectible. And
and you have
sometimes
ways of finding out things that maybe just touch on the licensing and what you are able to do and the restrictions that the rules you have around
Oh, sure.
the business as well.
We're licensed private investigators, and so I guess the old line of if a private individual follows somebody in their vehicle, they're stalking. If I do it, it's a surveillance.
And
completely lawful.
Yeah.
I'm engaging in a lawful activity.
Yeah.
So it's there are databases I have access to that people that are not in my line of work do not have access to. There are sources of information and the skill sets to develop information that I have that private individuals don't have because this is not what they do for a living. And because I've done this for quite some time, as has my partner, we've developed a lot of sources both domestically and internationally.
Yeah.
So when we need to pursue a judgment outside of the United States, we can do that and have done that. And I've done that this year, in fact, on a couple of occasions.
And you're also tied to confidentiality.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's whatever someone tells me, unless they're telling me they're planning some crime or something, whatever they tell me must stay with me because it's the requirement of my licensing, that confidentiality. And it's actually a bit tighter than an attorney-client. It's closer to my confidentiality is closer to a newspaper reporter and their confidential sources, and they just simply don't have to just don't disclose them.
Yeah,
I don't have to disclose my sources.
Yeah,
and I don't have to, and I don't disclose the content of my communication with my clients.
So, to me, it seems like there's a lot more value in doing it that way than going online and finding the background.
But yeah, in the case of online, I mean, it's very inexpensive to go online, and so that would be the draw. The challenge with that is you just get raw data, and the raw data. It's very hard to know how to value that data and have any kind of matrix and to turn that raw data into something that's investigatively useful. Additionally, a lot of that information has inaccuracies in it, and it's just very difficult to figure out what's what in that unless you know how to read it.
Yeah,
the key is knowing how to read it, and you learn how to read that kind of information as an investigator, and then we have resources well beyond what you'd see there in what we call in the trade candidly a data dump.
Yeah,
because I see it all the time where somebody gets 25, 30 pages of information and they have no idea what to do with that. Sure. It's just not a useful tool to them. Or they think they know what to do. Worse is they think they know what to do with it and they're doing some crazy stuff with it.
And so they're making decisions on information that's not accurate, which is a tough way to mitigate risks.
It's an impossible way to mitigate risks.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because they don't understand how to use the tool very often. And the tool is kind of a sketchy tool to begin with.
Yeah, gotcha.
So you really do need to have things done professionally because it's your money.
Yeah. Right. And so let's go back to square one again, which is the first of 3 steps. One would think that, especially in certain cases, that it would be very useful to consider hiring a service like what you're describing and have that be part of the budget. Let's say it's a renovation project, especially if it's a reasonably good sized project, renovation or new construction. It would seem like that would make a lot of sense to put something like that in the budget right away up front, because when something goes wrong, when something goes sideways, when something takes a lot more time than it should, and especially if it gets to the point where there's litigation or even research into litigation, but let's say it does go to litigation of 2, 3, 4, 5 years time, it's not only that the cost of the services, it is the cost of the emotional cost, the time lost cost. Just there's so many better things we can do, so many things that are better that we can do than to be fighting with someone that we should have been able to identify the risks ahead of time before we ever got
it's not the highest and best use of either capital or personal time.
Yeah, or emotional time.
Sure. The emotional duress that litigation will take years off a person's life. No question.
Yeah, and so that's why to me it just makes a lot of sense to really consider it up front. At least know that it's one of the tools that could be really valuable in the process.
And it's typically a very small fraction, as again the gross investment. A very small fraction.
Yep. And if someone is, let's say someone is getting involved with a renovation project, and let's say it's even the either side of the equation, and there's some background check to be done. What's the amount of time it typically takes to do something like that? Let's say that somebody wants to close a deal in this private money area. Sometimes deals need to close within 7 to 10 days or 2 weeks, whatever.
We can typically make good on this within 10 days.
Okay.
And be able to give somebody a good quality product that they can make an assessment on. Depending on obviously the more that's at risk, the greater the depth. So if you've got a project for a couple $100,000, that's one sort of level of risk. If you've got a project for $10 million, that's a completely different animal.
Right, for sure.
And you want to look a lot harder.
Yeah, so
100 million, still more.
Do you have a couple of things? One is, if you were to give, well, I'll throw them both out.
Sure.
If you were to give one piece of advice to our audience, to the people watching or listening to this podcast or watching the video, what would that be? And number 2 would be, do you have any particular resources or one thing that you think could be of value to our listeners?
Well, I would say that, we always offer a free consultation. So you can reach out to us and we'll listen to your situation regardless of where you are. I would say ask a lot of questions. Ask a lot of questions, and you do that for a couple of reasons. One, you get a depth of knowledge about what they know. 2, it causes you as the investor to think more deeply about your own investment. 3, these are all the benefits of questioning. And 3, if you ask some of the same questions in different, just phrase it slightly differently. And if you discover that answers are contradicting each other, that can be a huge flag right there.
Yeah, that's one that I really I think can be a real benefit to understanding what sort of ethics or
Yeah, absolutely.
integrity the party has. So,
And so that gives you that would be kind of something that a person can and should do.
mm-hmm,
Um, and it's extremely important to trust your intuitions. You know,
mm-hmm,
uh, if things start, if you start getting a sort of a bad vibe, as it were,
yeah,
uh, then that doesn't mean to kill the deal, but it does mean that it requires further
yeah,
research
yeah,
to really figure out what's going on. And I think most quality investigative outfits like Relentless Investigative will give you a free consultation.
mm-hmm,
So, you know, I will typically listen to the situation, give them give the person some feedback,
mm-hmm.
and they can decide whether it makes sense for them or not to retain us.
Sure.
But
In a minute, I'm going to just ask you to give us the way that listeners can get in touch with you.
absolutely.
But I had one more question, and that is, if, and you and I have spoken of this before, let's say that there is something that that is turned up in the investigation. You had given some examples in the past of that there is something that is a negative, but there are ways to mitigate that particular issue. It's really the key is to know that it's an issue and then to be able to mitigate it. So would you have an example of that and what that might look like?
Well, sure. Let's take criminal history. That
Mm-hmm.
would be that many people would think of as just a knockout.
Mm-hmm.
But criminal history is definitely a knockout if it's undisclosed.
Mm-hmm.
So if you ask the person, hey, you ever had any just any criminal convictions? It may seem like an unusual question, but just want to know. And if that person says, no, I've nothing, not even a drunk driving, nothing, not even a speeding ticket, say, oh, okay. And then if it's, say, in my work, I uncover a criminal conviction, especially if it's for something like fraud,
Mm-hmm.
that's huge. That's huge. If in contrast, that person says, yeah, actually, and I've seen, and this has happened a number of times. Yeah, I did a stretch for armed robbery.
Mm-hmm.
Even I did a stretch for wire fraud. Had one of those one time. I had a couple actually. Went to jail for wire fraud. It was a terrible mistake, he said. I actually interviewed that guy,
Mm-hmm.
and that person was up front.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you want to watch that person to some extent because there's a predilection there.
Yeah.
But the fact that they were forthright about something, especially as serious as that, begins to go on the path of mitigation right there.
Yeah.
So that's criminality.
Yeah, and so let's just take that one step further. If let's say that that it had been wire fraud mitigation. So what comes to mind for me would be if everything else looks really stellar with that particular person, might be that there's no authorization for certain tasks, whether it has maybe anything that has to do with handling the money. So just taking that out of their control.
That's exactly right. So then now when you're contracting with counsel, that here you have something that's foreseeable, namely the potential for mischievous behavior with the money.
Yeah.
So you just contract it out of their hands, and there's tons of different tools that you could create for that, or checks and double checks.
Yeah, and so point being that it doesn't necessarily have to blow a deal.
That's right.
Water, as long
nothing
as
necessarily a knockout.
Yeah.
Just because of its existence. It's having the knowledge and then saying, well, I have a deal and the deal looks very strong. I have these negatives. How can I control against those negatives and still do the deal?
Yeah. And that's really the basis of this whole discussion is And the whole podcast series is to help people understand that it's so critical, so important to identify risks, identify things that could be problems down the line, whether it has to do with budgets or timelines or team members, whatever it is, really identifying very clearly what those risks are and being able to mitigate them. And if they can't be mitigated, we just stay out of the deal. We just don't get involved at all. And it sounds like with your services or with people who do the type of work that you do, that's certainly a way to really help reduce risks and know what we're getting into. So if someone does want to reach out to you, let's say for the free 15-minute consultation, how would they reach you?
Well, let's see. One is I would encourage people to take a look at the website, which is relentlessinvestigative.com. Mm-hmm. My partner's in Southern California, and his direct phone number is area code 949. And I'm going to put my glasses on here to get the print on that. Yeah, it's area code 949-678-8317. My number is area code 510-703-7721. And my name is Norm Sokalski. My partner's name is Paul Moody. And so if if you're geographically down in Southern California, if that's more convenient for you, reach out to Paul. Reach out to me in Northern California, but we will talk with you regardless of where you are in the United States or abroad.
Excellent. Well, this has been really good, Norm. Really appreciate you taking the time. And again, if anybody wants to reach Norm, it's relentlessinvestigative.com. And I just want to add that if any of you as listeners have any ideas, any suggestions, any comments, any feedback, we really would like to hear that. We want to make this show just as positive and helpful as possible. We know everybody has a lot of things that they like to do, and so we want to make sure it's really valuable time. So love to have you give us feedback. You can do that by reaching us at feedback@tombraegelmann.com. And we'll have that in the description here. But again, feedback@tombraegelmann.com. That's BRAEGELMANN.com. So with that, Norm, I can't wait until we get to the next maybe interview where we can talk about some really lifelike experiences, challenges that you've been able to help people out with. So.
Absolutely. Give you some practical.
Great.
Thank you again for having me, Tom.
You bet. Thank you, Norm.